So have you ever just stared down a blinking text cursor?
Oh yeah, definitely. Just sitting there waiting.
Right, you sit down at your screen, the fans in your computer roar to life, and you are presented with a completely empty window.
Well, or at least it looks empty to us.
Exactly, it looks empty. But behind the scenes, I mean, the software is actively executing thousands of lines of code just to hold that exact space open for you, waiting for an input.
Yeah, it's a highly engineered state of nothingness.
It really is. And today, for this deep dive, we are looking at the digital equivalent of that frozen, expectant moment.
Which is quite a shift from our usual stack of dense research papers.
Totally, because our entire source material, like the absolute boundary of the universe we are exploring today, consists of exactly one short phrase.
It's incredibly minimal.
Under a heading that reads excerpts from New Note, there is exactly this text. It's 5 hash marks, a single space, and the words New Note. And that is literally it.
It is the ultimate boundary test for how we analyze information, really.
Yeah, how so?
Well, usually we are parsing these dense research papers or thick architectural diagrams, right? We're looking at how variables interact in really complex systems.
Sure, we're looking for patterns and data points.
Exactly. But when you are handed a document that is literally just a placeholder string and a formatting tag, you are forced to examine the mechanisms of the container itself.
Ah, rather than the contents.
Right, because there are no contents.
Okay, let's unpack this because staring at what is effectively a blank piece of digital paper is just a really weird position to be in.
It's definitely disorienting.
It is. We are looking at an empty vessel. But the goal of this deep dive remains exactly the same as always. We are going to impartially report on this void.
Which is harder than it sounds.
It really is, but we are not going to invent a secret backstory. We aren't going to hallucinate missing data, and we certainly aren't going to pull in outside facts that weren't in the provided material.
So we stick strictly to the parameters.
Exactly. We are going to rigorously examine the mechanics of hashtag tag new note.
Which is fundamentally an exercise in structural analysis. To analyze this properly, we have to look at how modern information systems manage the absolute absence of information.
Right, because the system has to handle it somehow.
What's fascinating here is that the phrase new note isn't a naturally occurring phenomenon,
Mm-mm.
It's a programmed state.
Right, the computer doesn't just spontaneously decide to call something new note.
Exactly. In computer science and user interface design, developers have to make a very deliberate choice about what happens when a user initiates an action but it hasn't actually provided any data yet.
Right, because a computer doesn't naturally understand empty the way a human does. Like, if I ask you what's in a glass and you say nothing, that makes total sense to us.
We conceptually grasp the void.
Yes, but in a database, nothing can be a catastrophic error.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it could be a null value, which can just completely crash an application if the code tries to read it and expects text.
That happens all the time in poorly written software.
Right, so developers use default strings to stop that from happening.
And that is the core mechanism at play here. A default string, like new note, is essentially a protective measure.
Like a structural safeguard.
Exactly. When an application creates a new record in a database, it has to allocate memory space for it.
And it has to put something in that space.
Right, because if it leaves that space as a null value, meaning the complete literal absence of a defined value, any function that tries to display that title in a menu or a sidebar might just trigger what we call a null reference exception.
And then boom, the app crashes.
The app crashes, the user gets frustrated, and data might get lost. So the system injects a placeholder. It writes new note into the database as a temporary shield.
So it's basically holding the door open.
Yeah, holding the structure together until the human arrives to give it real meaning.
I wonder, though, if we're dealing with a user interface artifact here, or maybe an extraction artifact?
That's a really good distinction to make.
Because the source explicitly frames this with the header, excerpts from new note.
Right, the word excerpts.
Yeah, that word excerpt strongly suggests a programmatic scraping tool or a summarization tool was run over a much larger file system.
It implies an automated process for sure.
Like if I point a data extraction script at a directory of files and it hits a file that contains absolutely no user-generated text, it might just grab the default title and spit it back out.
Just to fulfill its programming.
Right. So is it possible we aren't looking at a note that someone created and just abandoned, but rather a file system error where a script just harvested the default metadata of a corrupted file?
That's a highly plausible technical read, actually. When web scrapers or data pipelines parse text, They rely on document object models, or DOMs, to understand what they are looking at.
Right, the DOM is like the map of the page.
Exactly. So if a script is tasked with pulling an excerpt, it's usually programmed to look for the first paragraph tag, or maybe the first string of human-readable text right after a heading.
But if there is no text...
Right. If the user never typed anything, the parser just hits the end of the file prematurely.
Oh, wow. So what does it do?
Well, to satisfy its own requirement to return an excerpt, the extraction script just simply echoes the title back.
Like a failsafe.
Yeah, it essentially says, look, the best excerpt I can possibly give you from a document titled New Note is just the phrase New Note.
Wow, so it's essentially a software echo.
That's a great way to put it.
The system asked for data, the data was empty, so the system just shouted the file name back into the void.
And we are left analyzing the echo.
It's kind of eerie when you think about it, but here is where we really have to look closely at the formatting, because this isn't just plain text.
No, the punctuation is key here.
Yeah, we have those 5 hash marks.
Yeah.
Hashtag, tag, 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 tag.
Right, which tells us exactly what ecosystem we're in.
Exactly, because in Markdown language, which is the underlying architecture of almost every modern text editor, wiki, and note-taking app out there, hash marks dictate the hierarchical structure of the document.
Let's break down how that mechanism works for the listeners, because it's vital to understanding what we're actually looking at.
Yeah, please do.
So Markdown was created as a lightweight markup language. The original goal was to write using plain text formatting that could be easily read by a human.
Like, it doesn't look like crazy code.
Right, no angle brackets or messy tags. But it also needed to be easily converted into HTML, which is the structural language of the web, by a computer.
So it's a bridge between human readability and machine readability.
Exactly. And when a Markdown parser reads a text file, it doesn't just read the words like we do. It builds what's called an abstract syntax tree, or AST.
Oh, right. The AST is sort of like a structural blueprint of the document, right?
Yes, a very rigid blueprint.
It basically maps out the parent and child relationships of every single paragraph, list, and heading.
Correct. The parser scans the text, character by character, and it converts symbols into functional nodes on that tree.
So when it sees a hash mark, it builds a node.
Right. When the parser encounters a single hash mark followed by a space, it creates a heading 1 node. That is the highest level of hierarchy, usually representing the main title of a page.
And if it sees 2...
2 hash marks create a heading 2, indicating a major section underneath that title.
But our source material gives us 5 hash marks. Hashtag, tag, hashtag, tag, new note.
Which is very specific.
It is. That translates to an HTML H5 tag, a heading 5. I just find that incredibly bizarre.
It definitely stands out.
Because if you were starting a brand new document, you don't start at level 5. You start at level 1.
You start at the top of the tree.
Right. Creating a heading level 5 implies that there are 4 levels of structural hierarchy above it that we simply cannot see.
It implies a deeply, deeply nested environment.
Like Russian nesting dolls.
Exactly like that. Think about how file directories work on your computer right now.
Okay, yeah.
You don't just put a file loosely on your hard drive. You put it in a documents folder, and then inside that maybe a work folder, and inside that a 2026 projects folder.
Right, you build a path.
A heading 5 operates on that exact same logic, but within the text itself. It suggests that this specific new note string was generated deep inside a very complex outline.
Okay, let me test a theory here based on that.
Sure, go ahead.
We know we were looking at an excerpt, right?
Yes, the header states that.
What if the 5 hash marks aren't actually part of the user's intended note at all?
Oh, I see where you're going.
What if the 5 hash marks were generated by the extraction software itself just to catalog the data it was scraping?
Okay, explain how that would work mechanistically. Let's walk through it.
Okay, so say you have a massive JSON file, a data format used to transmit information between servers and web applications.
Right, very common in data dumps.
And this JSON file contains thousands and thousands of user notes. A developer writes a script to export all these notes into one single massive markdown document so a human can actually read them.
Because JSON isn't very pleasant for humans to read.
Exactly. So the script needs a way to separate the notes visually in this new giant document.
It needs a hierarchy.
Yes. So it assigns heading 1 to the user's name, heading 2 to the year, heading 3 to the month, heading 4 to the day, and then heading 5 to the individual notes created on that specific day.
That is a very, very compelling structural hypothesis.
Right, because it fits the artifact perfectly.
It does. If the extraction tool is using a nested loop to build the final document, those 5 hash marks are simply the output of the 5th loop.
Just a counter ticking up?
Exactly. The script basically says, we're at the fifth level of the data hierarchy, so append 5 hash marks before printing the title of the note.
And because the note was never populated with text by the user?
The script just prints hashtag tag 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 new note and then immediately moves on to the next item.
Leaving us with this tiny isolated fragment.
It changes the entire perspective of the source when you look at it that way.
It really does. It stops being a blank page that someone deliberately stared at and starts being a tiny microscopic structural coordinate in a massive automated data pipeline.
Yes, a coordinate with no destination.
We are essentially looking at a GPS coordinate for a building that was never constructed.
And this touches on a massive challenge in modern data management, honestly.
Oh, for sure.
This raises an important question about how we organize our lives. You, the listener, you deal with this every time you try to organize your own digital spaces.
We all do it.
We build these incredibly elaborate organizational structures. We create tags, deeply nested folders, categories, and subcategories, all in anticipation of the data we think we're going to store.
We build the architecture before we actually have the content.
Yes. It's the infrastructure of productivity.
I love that phrase, the infrastructure of productivity.
And quite often, that infrastructure vastly outpaces actual production.
We get so caught up in organizing that we forget to create.
Exactly. We
Yeah.
end up with systems that are just full of empty containers.
Which is exactly what the source is.
The tag new note is the artifact of that exact phenomenon. It represents the creation of a container, specifically at the fifth level of organizational depth, that was ultimately left entirely devoid of substance.
The architecture worked perfectly, but the human execution simply never occurred.
Right. And it really highlights the friction between the speed of software and the speed of human thought.
Oh, that's a huge point.
The system can generate a database row, assign it a primary key, inject a default string, apply a markdown formatting tag, and render it to the screen in literally a millisecond.
It's instantaneous.
It takes effectively zero cognitive load for the system to create the new note.
But for the user to actually fill that note with a thought or an observation or a piece of research,
That requires immense cognitive load.
yeah, typing out a well-formed thought is hard work.
That disparity is exactly why we see so many of these artifacts in our digital environments. The barrier to creating a placeholder is practically non-existent.
But the barrier to creating actual knowledge is really high.
Precisely. And when you look at the phrase new note, it's really worth examining the specific choice of those two words by the interface designers.
Yeah, why those two words? Why not untitled? Why not blank document?
Well, untitled is what we used to see all the time in older operating systems.
Right? Oh, man, yeah. If you opened a word processor in the late 90s, the window bar literally always said Untitled 1.
Always. And the shift from untitled to new note is a really fascinating shift in UI affordances.
UI affordances. Let's define that for the listener really quick.
Sure. In design theory, an affordance is a property of an object that suggests how it should be used.
Okay, so like the physical shape of a thing tells you what to do with it?
Exactly. A button affords pushing. A knob affords turning.
Right.
Now, apply that to text. The word untitled is purely descriptive. It simply states a fact. This file does not have a title yet.
But it's passive, isn't it? It's almost a little sterile.
Exactly. Untitled looks backward at what hasn't been done yet.
Like a subtle guilt trip from the software.
Yes. New note, however, is an active prompt. The word new implies novelty, freshness, and immediate potential.
And what about the word note?
The word note is a specific behavioral container. It doesn't ask you to write a novel or a comprehensive report.
Right, a note is low stakes.
Yes. It affords quick, informal capture. You don't have to worry about formatting or perfection.
So by defaulting to new note, the software developers are actively trying to reduce the psychological friction of the blank page.
They're trying to coach the user into action.
But based on the fact that this document we're looking at remained a new note, that psychological coaching totally failed.
It did. The prompt was there, the low-stakes container was successfully generated, the formatting was applied.
But the human on the other side of the screen just walked away.
Exactly. Or, considering our previous theory, maybe the human was never really involved at all.
Right. What if the automated system scraped a database row that was created entirely by mistake?
Like an accidental tap on a create icon on a smartphone screen that the user didn't even notice.
Oh, that happens to me all the time.
That introduces the concept of ghost inputs. Modern touch screens and highly sensitive trackpads register inputs that the user never actually intended to make.
Like when a phone is unlocked in a pocket and just starts doing things?
Or a palm resting too heavily on a keyboard while you're reaching for your coffee.
Right.
The system registers the input, dutifully fires off the command to create a new record and populates it with the default new notes string.
And the user goes about their day completely unaware that they just generated a permanent empty record in a remote database somewhere, which eventually gets caught in an automated extraction script, assigned a level 5 heading based on whatever complex metadata structure it was buried in, and delivered to us as a source material file.
It's a remarkable journey for a mistake.
It really is. I have to say, applying technical rigor to an empty document is surprisingly revealing.
It's an exercise in discipline.
It strips away all the bias and narrative we usually have to fight through when we do these deep dives.
Absolutely. When you remove the content, you are left only with the physics of the medium itself.
There's nothing to argue about.
Right. We aren't distracted by the author's opinions or the validity of their research methods because there is no author and no research.
There's no political slant to hashtag tag new note.
None whatsoever. There is no cultural bias. It is entirely 100% neutral.
So by being forced to analyze the absence of data, we end up analyzing the rules of the system that houses the data.
Which is arguably just as important as the data itself.
And I think it's really important to clarify for you, the listener, why we are treating this with such seriousness.
We owe them that transparency.
Definitely. When we set out to analyze a stack of sources, the easiest thing to do when faced with a gap in the information is to just bridge that gap with our own assumptions.
It's human nature to fill in the blanks.
Right. If a research paper skips over a key methodology step, the temptation is to guess what they did so the narrative flows smoothly for the show.
But guessing destroys the integrity of the analysis.
Completely.
If you start hallucinating data to make a story more compelling, you cease to be an analyst, and you literally just become a fiction writer.
And that destroys the trust you, the listener, have placed in us.
It really does.
If we were to sit here and say, well, new note is clearly a metaphor for the modern economic condition, and the 5 hash marks represent the 5 pillars of banking, we would be insulting your intelligence.
It would be absurd.
Completely absurd. We have a strict parameter on this show. Impartially report on the source material.
And the source material is exactly a formatting tag and a placeholder string.
So, we explore the mechanisms of formatting tags and placeholder strings.
It's an exercise in intellectual discipline. Recognizing the exact boundary of what you know and refusing to step past it without evidence is the foundational skill of critical thinking.
That is so well said.
We know the text. We know the markdown parsing rules that govern the text. We know the database principles that generate default strings.
But we do not know the human intent behind it.
Exactly. So we analyze the systemic mechanisms instead.
It reminds me that every single piece of information we consume, whether it's an expansive 1,000-page encyclopedia or a simple 2-word database error, is suspended in a web of technology.
It doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Right. The way the information is formatted, the way it is queried, the way it is rendered on your screen, all of those steps fundamentally alter the relationship you have with the data.
The container is never truly invisible.
No, it always leaves a mark.
The 5 hash marks are proof of that. They are the scaffolding showing through the drywall.
Wow, that is a great analogy, the scaffolding showing through the drywall.
That's exactly what it is.
So what does this all mean? As we wrap up this highly unusual deep dive, let's look at what we've actually uncovered by examining the void.
We covered quite a bit of ground, actually.
We did. We haven't learned a new scientific theory or historical fact today, but we've unpacked the hidden mechanics of the digital environments we interact with every single day.
The invisible systems.
Right. We've looked at how software defends itself against null values, how markdown parsers build hidden structural hierarchies like ASTs, and how user interface design attempts to manipulate our behavior with specific phrasing like new note.
We have fully exhausted the parameters of the provided material.
We really have.
The source contained the heading excerpts from new note and the string hashtag tag need new note. And we have mapped the technical and structural reality of those characters.
And we did it without crossing the line into invention.
Which was the mission.
Yes, because we respect your time too much to feed you hallucinations. When the source is a dense, highly contested piece of investigative journalism, we will bring that same rigorous, mechanistic breakdown to the arguments and the data.
We apply the exact same lens.
But when the source is the digital equivalent of an empty lot, we just map the dimensions of the lot.
The analytical engine remains consistent, regardless of the input volume.
So, to you, the learner, Thank you for going down this highly specific, deeply technical rabbit hole with us today.
That was a fun one.
I know you tune in to gain knowledge quickly and to see things from a completely different perspective. Today, that perspective wasn't about the content of a document, but the invisible infrastructure that makes the document possible.
And that infrastructure is everywhere.
It really is. But before we log off, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you go about your day.
The final takeaway.
We spent this time talking about default states, placeholder strings, and the empty containers we build in our digital lives. I want you to think about the physical world around you, or even your own mental habits.
Oh, turning it inward.
Yeah. What is your personal default string? When you are dropped into a completely new situation, a completely blank slate with no pre-existing data and no instructions, what is the very first automatic, unprompted assumption your brain injects into the void to keep from crashing?